Hello. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Crowded History, a collaborative video series between the American Philosophical Society and the Museum of the American Revolution. I'm Mike Madeja, Head of Education Programs at the American Philosophical Society, or the APS. In this episode, you'll hear from Dr. Amy Ellison and get a quick tour of Philly with me. Be sure to check out the additional object connections on the Crowded History homepage as well. So I'll take you to 3 locations in Philadelphia that tell a tale of triumph and failure through the eyes of Charles Willson Peale. Peale was an artist, revolutionary, museum founder, and overall quirky historic figure. This tale, like Peale, is loopy, fun, and fully based in history. Remember, in this video, you'll hear from Dr. Amy Ellison first, and then hop back to me in present-day Philadelphia, where we'll see 3 locations: 6th and Market Street, 3rd and Lombard, and then we'll end with the State House, or Independence Hall as we know it today. Enjoy learning more about Charles Willson Peale's Triumphal Arch with Dr. Amy Ellison, and I'll see you soon. Oh, and one more thing. You'll notice in my video tours of Philadelphia that I'm wearing a face mask. That's because we had to film with a small staff, and during the filming, it was during a peak in the COVID-19 cases in Philadelphia. We're making this video series to be fun, lighthearted, and engaging, but also as a moment for us to reflect back on when we could be in crowds in Philly. It didn't feel right to film without a face mask on, and as a responsible citizen, as a responsible staff member, we wanted to make sure that everybody involved, even passersby in Philadelphia, were safe. So please don't be too distracted by the face mask, and if you need additional assistance understanding what was being said, please feel free to reach out to us and let us know. But again, remember, we're all in this together, and that when we wear face masks, we care about each other and ourselves. So thank you for understanding. Cool. Hi, folks. I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Amy Noel Ellison. Amy is the exhibition curator at the Los Altos History Museum in Los Altos, California. And from 2016 through 2018, I had the true pleasure of working with Amy as the Andrew W. Mellon Postdoctoral Curatorial Fellow at the American Philosophical Society Museum. Amy co-curated Curious Revolutionaries, the Peales of Philadelphia, and was the lead curator for In Franklin's Footsteps, 275 years at the American Philosophical Society, an exhibition celebrating the Society's 275th anniversary. Dr. Ellison received her PhD in history from Boston University in 2016 and her BA from California State University, Fresno. So Amy, I'll let you take it away on Crowded History, Philadelphia's ill-fated Triumphal Arch with Peale.
Great, thank you so much, Mike, and thank you to APS and Museum of American Revolution for putting this together. Really excited to be talking today about Peale's ill-fated Triumphal Arch. And this is such a great idea to do crowded history since we can't gather together in person these days. It can really be therapeutic to sort of look back at public events and public gatherings in the past and sort of live vicariously through those non-socially distanced crowds from history. So, but however, today I'm going to be talking about an event that actually we can be sort of glad that we were not around for, and that is the unveiling of Charles Willson Peale's Triumphal Arch on January 22nd, 1784. And if you've never heard of Peale's Triumphal Arch, that's because it was a complete and total disaster that Peale himself spent the rest of his life trying to forget. So the Triumphal Arch was just one of many ways that Americans celebrated victory and the end of the war. After Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown in 1781, Americans celebrated victory together in many ways. They gathered for private parties, public parades, firework displays, raucous nights at the tavern, toasting God and General Washington. And after the Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3rd, 1783, the Continental Congress proclaimed a day of public Thanksgiving. But in Pennsylvania, the Supreme Executive Council must have thought that a day of Thanksgiving was not quite going to cut it. They decided that Philadelphians also needed public demonstrations of joy. That was the term that they used, public demonstrations of joy, in order to truly celebrate this really momentous occasion in their nation's history. So they tasked a group of men, which was led by Charles Willson Peale, to plan the festivities and to put together only the most magnificent celebration that Philadelphians had ever seen. What they wanted for this celebration was spectacle. And when it came to spectacle, there was really nobody better than Charles Willson Peale. Peale was a man of many, many talents, many different interests. He made his mark in American history in a variety of ways. He was an artist, a naturalist, inventor, a museum operator. You can see here, this is his self-portrait. This is in the APS museum collections. And he did this self-portrait while serving in Washington's army between 1776 and 1778. And after serving in Washington's army, he returned to Philadelphia and actually quickly became one of the city's most visible patriots. In addition to painting portraits of America's revolutionary heroes, Peale created these elaborate window displays at his home on 3rd and Lombard, and you can see that there on the right. That is actually done by Charles Wilson's brother, James. That's the back of his house on 3rd and Lombard. That's where his museum got started and where these window displays would have been. They were backlit transparencies, and they celebrated the military victories. They celebrated Washington and his generals. They celebrated the French alliance, and they were hugely popular. They drew crowds from all over the city. Peale once wrote that you couldn't throw a basket outside of his top window, his upstairs window. You couldn't throw a basket onto the street without it would never hit the ground, because the crowds were so thickly packed outside of his house waiting to see these window displays. And we think, if you look at this, this image on the left here, we think that this may have been a design for a window display. It was likely created much later in 1824. It was probably for Lafayette's return tour. But it gives you a sense of what these illuminations might have been like, what people might have been seeing going to Peale's house and seeing these types of window displays. So Peale, everybody knew that Peale had a genius for crowd-pleasing spectacle. And just within a few days, he came up with this idea for erecting a triumphal arch on Market Street between 6th and 7th. The choice to build a triumphal arch, it was not accidental. It seems fairly obvious. They were used by ancient Romans to celebrate military victories. This is one of the most famous and well-preserved triumphal arches from antiquity. This is the Arch of Constantine in Rome. So it seems, a fairly obvious sort of structure for Peale to choose for this occasion. But Peale also believed that as a symbol of ancient Rome, this triumphal arch could inspire Republican values. There were many people in the Republic, and Peale was one of them, that was worried about the stability of the new nation. He and many others believed that the nation would collapse if its citizens were not virtuous. And actually, just a few years before this, Peale had taken on this project of painting portraits of America's revolutionary heroes to sort of give these models of civic virtue to the new citizens of the new republic. So like so many of Peale's efforts, this arch, it was a spectacle, but it was meant to inspire as much as it was meant to entertain. It was meant to celebrate the new nation, but also to help it to survive. So for a few weeks, Philadelphians waited in great anticipation for the arch to be revealed. And Peale was an excellent showman, an excellent hype man, and he had newspapers publish very detailed descriptions of what the glorious wooden monuments would look like. And unfortunately, we don't have an original sketch of the arch. This sketch is actually done by one of Peale's descendants in 1901. It was based on the really elaborate descriptions that were published in newspapers and the descriptions that Peale himself wrote in his autobiography. So this is probably very accurate to what it would have looked like, but unfortunately we don't have anything from the original period. But in true Peale form, this was no ordinary arch. It was huge. It was 50.5 feet wide and nearly 40 feet tall. So it was this huge, imposing structure that spanned the entire width of Market Street. And it was also incredibly elaborate. So as you can see here on the top, you've got four virtues here. These are the 4 personifications of cardinal virtues. So we have prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Beside these, this is a bust of Lafayette, recognizing the French alliance. This is sort of an obelisk-shaped monument that was meant to honor the soldiers who had died in the war. You can see here above the central arch the letters SPQP, which was Peale's clever play on the Senate and people of Pennsylvania. It's a clever play on the Roman Republic's SPQR. And the arch was also adorned with many different symbols. So you can see there's a lot going on here. Many different symbols and scenes that were meant to inspire civic and national pride. So for example, we have Cincinnatus returning to his plow, militiamen mustering. There are symbols of ships, of wheat to emphasize the importance of commerce, the bounty of America. There's a symbol of a library to represent the importance of arts and sciences to the new republic. To celebrate the nation's natural beauty, you can see on the 4 arches here, these are chains of flowers, and these flowers are all native to America. In addition to these symbols and scenes, there were also dozens of portraits and paintings that portraits of famous American generals and famous military victories that were affixed all over the arch that Peale did himself. And if that wasn't enough, there was also 1,100 lamps placed all over the arch to light it up in brilliant colors. The paintings were transparent, so they would sort of shine through the paintings. So to say the least, there was a lot going on with this arch. But Peale also had one other trick up his sleeve, and ever the showman, he kept it a secret. So everything else, all the other details were published in the newspaper. The one thing that he kept a secret as a surprise for the crowd was literally over the top here, and that was the central image of peace. Once darkness fell, this image of peace, this goddess peace, a figure of peace, would suddenly appear. It would be suspended above the arch, illuminated by these hidden lamps that were concealed beneath her. And Peale actually mechanized the figure to descend from the roof of a nearby house, which incidentally would become the president's house. This is where George Washington would later reside. So peace would descend from this house onto the arch. And you can see here that she's holding a torch. This is actually a fuse, and it will hit another fuse down here, and it will light up all 1,100 lamps within 1 minute. And just illuminate the arch in all these beautiful colors. And then 700 fireworks would go off. So if everything went according to plan, this was really going to be just the most spectacular, most magnificent celebration display that Philadelphians had ever seen. So Peale and his team of carpenters worked for over a month to put this gigantic wooden structure together. They completed dozens of paintings, all these other ornamentations. They worked really hard devising various technical components as well. This was a highly technical endeavor as well. So finally, on January 22nd, the day of the unveiling, Peale got up at 4 in the morning. He had a cup of hot chocolate. This incidentally would be the only thing that he ate all day. And he got to work setting up the 1,100 lamps. That was the last thing that he needed to do. So as darkness fell, Philadelphians flocked to 6th and Market. They probably had dinner. They maybe went out and had some drinks at a local tavern. And then they flocked to 6th and Market to see this grand unveiling. There were no other celebrations allowed. So the city literally banned any other public demonstrations of joy. This was the only public demonstration of joy that was allowed to happen on January 22nd. So this was really, truly the place to be on that night. So huge crowds began to form, but Peale was incredibly organized. So through the central arch, he really directed traffic quite well. So through the central arch, this was where carriages, horses, sleighs, they passed underneath the central arch. And then they could loop around once they got to 7th Street and loop around if they wanted to go through again. Pedestrians could go one way through these smaller arches and the other way through the other one on the other side. And they would sort of set up a loop so that people could loop through on Market Street and see the arch as many times as they wanted. And there were directions, there were transparent directions to direct this traffic. It was highly organized. And Peale later wrote that it was so that a multitude could see the exhibition in an easy and commodious manner, avoiding any sort of crowding. So you have to respect that level of organization. So as Peale set about getting the final lamps ready on top of the arch, his brother James and his eldest son Raphael climbed onto the roof of the president's house, and they were going to set the goddess peace in motion to begin the show. And almost everything was perfect, almost everything. And actually there was one pretty crucial exception to that. For some reason, and we're not sure why, Peale was never sure why, the rocket stand was placed too closely to the oil paintings on the arch. And so when the first rocket went off, and Peale later wrote that it was a pretty big rocket, the paintings caught fire. They were incredibly flammable. They were oil paintings. They were covered in varnish. The amount of oil and varnish they used to make them transparent was a lot, and they were highly flammable. So the paintings caught fire. They were fixed all over the arch. So then the entire wooden structure was very quickly engulfed in flames. And the other 699 rockets, which Peale wrote later that they lay in a promiscuous manner on different stages of the building, also set off with the fire that was engulfing the arch. And this absolutely terrified the crowd, completely understandably. It actually killed one spectator and several others were injured. Peale himself was seriously injured too. He had actually been on top of the arch here, putting the last few lamps up. These were the last few lamps that he had to put up. And as the arch caught fire, Peale himself also caught fire as he was trying to get down from the arch. He fell 20 feet to the ground. He broke a couple of his ribs. He was injured. He was embarrassed. He was humiliated. And he just took off running. He fled down Market Street. He didn't stop to deal with the situation. He didn't even stop to see if his son was okay, or his brother. He just ran. And he ran down Market Street, and he finally on 3rd Street saw somebody with a sleigh, hitched a ride with them down 3rd Street all the way to his home on 3rd and Lombard, and stayed in bed for 3 weeks. So the arch, which was supposed to be this magnificent celebration of peace, just the most spectacular celebration that Philadelphians had ever seen, turned out to be a disaster and also a tragedy. But that is not quite the end of the story, and it wasn't actually quite the end of the Triumphal Arch either. The frame of the structure actually remained largely intact, and it was just the paintings and the ornamentation that had been completely destroyed. So once Peale recovered, once his ribs healed and he recovered from his injuries to his burns and his pride as well, he set about redoing these paintings, and actually largely out of his own pocket. He paid for this, redoing this arch. So at noon on May 10th, 1784, the restored arch debuted on Chestnut Street in front of the State House, which is now Independence Hall. And once again, the crowds came out. Newspapers reported that it afforded great satisfaction to many thousands of spectators. And there were no casualties. And I think it's important to point out there were also no pyrotechnics involved whatsoever. So there you have the story of not one, but 2 triumphal arches in Philadelphia's crowded history. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy, for that great retelling of the tale. So I'm here at 6th and Market Streets, the location of the first Triumphal Arch. Yes, the first, because as you remember, Amy mentioned that it actually burned down and went from triumph to disaster. The Triumphal Arch, as you know, was quite large and grand. With details conjuring ancient Roman times, democratic virtues, and victory, it spanned the whole street and was about 50.5 feet wide and 40 feet tall. It's quite the architectural and artistic feat. You can also see this structure behind me. Today, we call it the President's House, and it's a recreated outline of the home where George Washington resided while in Philadelphia. Basically, it's a large and quite significant home. I truly think only Charles Willson Peale would be bold enough to think to use this house as part of a surprise stunt involving a massive triumphal arch. But as you know from Amy's story, the arch was pretty much anything but triumphal, and this is not where the story ends. So let's head to our next location. I'm here at our second location, 3rd and Lombard. If you face such a wild disaster as Peale did, where would you run? Home, right? Well, Peale was no different. His home, where he actually first started his museum, was located on this street. Peale sprinted here, aches, pains, bruises, and all, after the arch was set ablaze by some mistakes and errors in the execution of the display. As Amy mentioned, Peale wasn't even sure why, but the rocket stand was placed too close to the arch. As one rocket went off and other rockets went careening into the crowds, the paintings and other features of the arch, including himself, caught fire. Injured in both a physical sense and in pride, he sprinted down Market Street and was soon able to hitch a ride on a sleigh, out of all things, some 7 blocks away, which is pretty close to a mile. It wouldn't be a true Peale story if we ended here, though, so let's wrap things up at our third and final location. Second chances are usually a good thing. So, despite the massive disaster of the first Triumphal Arch, Peale was given that second chance to celebrate the nation in a truly grand way. I'm here at the old State House, or Independence Hall as we know it today. On the other side of this historic building is where Peale built his second arch. For this one, Peale mostly paid out of his own pocket and relied on some remaining structural pieces from the first arch. Still, no small feat of artistic and architectural prowess. Fueled by more than hot chocolate this time, and having removed any pyrotechnics, his second attempt, made on May 10th, 1784, was successful. The crowds cheered and applauded this final triumphal arch and Peale's success. And that's where I'd like to leave you, on a story of success and historic crowds. So let's think a little bit more about historic crowds through the moment. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Crowded History with the APS and the Museum of the American Revolution. We do want to give a quick shout out to our colleagues at Independence National Historical Park for preserving and sharing the history of many of the sites we saw today. So, as you can see, history is all around us, and there are so many stories just waiting to be told. We hope this jaunt back in time has brought some hope for days when we can soon gather again in historic crowds. We hope this inspires you to look for history and wander your own neighborhood. And remember, we're all in this together. Bye for now.